In the shadow of dense northern forests and along the winding arteries of untamed rivers, a different breed of Viking journey began. Not westward into the storm-racked seas of Britain and Francia, but eastward into a world of endless waterways, vast steppes, and glittering empires. Here, the Norse became more than raiders. They became traders, rulers, and the sworn guardians of emperors. This is the forgotten saga of the Varangians, the Rus, and their unbreakable bond with the mighty Byzantine Empire. Welcome aboard, voyagers of history. If you are new here, join us as we set sail on another epic journey into the Viking Age. And for those returning, sharpen your axes and brace your shields, for today, our longship turns toward the rising sun. Main story begins. The story of the Vikings in the east is one of great rivers that carried men and ships into lands far from the salty coasts of Scandinavia. To the Norse, rivers were not boundaries but highways. Their sleek, shallow-draft longships could sail the stormy seas, then glide seamlessly into narrow waterways, carrying warriors and merchants deep into the heart of Europe. Beyond the Baltic Sea stretched the wild frontier of Eastern Europe, a land of forests, marshes, and wide plains dotted with Slavic, Finnic, and Baltic tribes. Here, the Norse were known as Varangians. The word itself carried meaning wanderers, oath-swearers, mercenaries for hire. To some, they were plunderers. To others, they were bringers of order. And to all, they were men to be feared. The lure of the East was wealth. While raiding monasteries in the West yielded gold and slaves, the East promised something different: trade. The forests of the North teemed with furs prized in distant markets, with wax and honey, and with slaves captured from rival tribes. Southward, along the rivers, these goods could be exchanged for silver, silk, wine, and jewels, luxuries flowing from the great Byzantine Empire. For the Vikings, Byzantium was no myth. It was real, glittering, and reachable. The Norse carved two main routes. The first followed the Volga River, flowing south into the Caspian Sea and linking to Persia. The second, and perhaps the most famous, traced the Dnieper River southward, through perilous rapids, past Slavic villages and steppe tribes, until it emptied into the Black Sea, leading directly to Constantinople, the queen of cities. By the mid-9th century, the Varangians were more than passing raiders. They began to carve out dominion. According to the primary chronicle, a medieval text that blends myth and memory, the Slavic tribes grew weary of constant conflict and invited the Norse to bring order. "Our land is great and rich," the chronicle records them saying, "but there is no order in it. Come to rule and reign over us." And so, in the year 862, a Norseman named Rurik sailed south. Rurik established his rule in Novgorod, a vital northern settlement, and from there laid the foundations of a dynasty that would endure for centuries. His reign marked the beginning of what history remembers as the Rus people, a fusion of Norse rulers and Slavic subjects. From Rurik's line, princes would emerge who carved their legacy in blood and fire. After Rurik's death, his kinsman Oleg assumed power. Oleg was no mere caretaker. He was an ambitious warlord with a vision. He pushed further south, seizing control of Kiev, a settlement of immense strategic importance. From Kiev, Oleg declared his dominion. "Let this be the mother of Rus cities." His words foreshadowed Kiev's future as the beating heart of an empire. From Kiev, the Varangians could control trade along the Dnieper, but Oleg's ambitions went beyond commerce. He looked to Constantinople, the wealthiest city in the known world. In 907, he launched a daring campaign. With longships numbering in the hundreds, he sailed the Dnieper, braving the treacherous rapids, and swept into the Black Sea. Byzantine chroniclers wrote of the terror as Viking ships appeared outside their impregnable walls. The Byzantines were no strangers to northern raiders, but Oleg's army was formidable. The primary chronicle records that Oleg nailed his shield to the gates of Constantinople itself, a symbolic gesture of dominance. Whether literal or legendary, the image captures the audacity of the Rus. The war ended not with destruction, but with negotiation. The Byzantines, masters of diplomacy, offered a treaty that guaranteed the Rus favorable trade rights in Constantinople. It was a pact between raiders and empire, forged not only with steel, but with silver. This treaty marked a turning point. The Rus were no longer just marauders. They were partners in trade. Their merchants flooded into Constantinople, bringing furs, wax, honey, and slaves, and returning with silks, wines, and precious metals. It was a relationship of both tension and opportunity, with each side wary of the other, yet bound by mutual benefit. But the Varangian spirit was not easily restrained. After Oleg came Igor, who continued to press Byzantine power. His raids were less successful. In 941, Igor led a fleet against Constantinople, but the Byzantines unleashed their fearsome secret weapon, Greek fire. This burning liquid, projected from siphons, clung to wood, water, and flesh, igniting ships in a blaze from which there was no escape. Igor's fleet was devastated. Yet, undeterred, he returned and forced another treaty, proving the resilience of the Rus. Igor's story ended violently. While collecting tribute from the Drevlians, a Slavic tribe, he demanded more than they could bear. The Drevlians rebelled, capturing Igor and executing him in a manner as gruesome as it was memorable. According to the chronicle, he was tied to 2 bent trees, which were then released, tearing his body apart. His death might have shattered the Rus, but instead it gave rise to one of history's most remarkable women, his widow, Olga. Olga of Kiev became regent for her young son, Sviatoslav. Her vengeance against the Drevlians was legendary. First, she tricked them with feigned offers of peace, only to bury emissaries alive. Next, she invited their leaders to a bathhouse, where she had the structure set aflame, burning them alive. Finally, she besieged their capital, but offered mercy if they paid tribute in birds. The Drevlians complied, but Olga had prepared a trap. She tied burning sulfur to the birds and released them, setting the entire city ablaze as the birds returned to their roosts. Olga's fury left the Drevlians shattered and her legend cemented. Yet Olga was not only a figure of vengeance. She traveled to Constantinople, where she embraced Christianity, becoming the first Rus ruler to convert. The Byzantines hailed her as a noble ally, and later, the Orthodox Church canonized her as a saint. Through her, the seeds of Christianity took root in Rus soil, though it would be her grandson who completed the transformation. Sviatoslav, Olga's son, embodied the warrior spirit of his people. Raised in a world of axes and shields, he led campaigns across the steppes, clashing with the Bulgarians and steppe nomads and threatening Byzantium itself. He cared little for luxury, eating from iron bowls and sleeping on horsehide. To his men, he was the archetype of the warrior prince. To his enemies, he was a scourge. But his ambition led him into conflict with the Byzantines, who, wary of his growing power, engineered his downfall. On his return north, Sviatoslav was ambushed by the Pechenegs, a nomadic people allied with Byzantium. He was slain, and his skull was fashioned into a drinking cup, a grim reminder of the fates awaiting even great princes. Yet out of these struggles, the Rus state grew stronger. With Sviatoslav's death, his son Vladimir rose to power. Vladimir's reign marked a turning point, not just in Rus politics, but in its spiritual destiny. Vladimir, known to history as Vladimir the Great, began as a pagan, embracing the Old Norse and Slavic gods. His court echoed with sacrifices and feasts in honor of Perun, the thunder god, and other deities. Yet Vladimir was also pragmatic. He recognized the power of religion as a unifying force. Legends tell of how he evaluated the faiths of his neighbors, examining Islam, Judaism, Western Christianity, and Eastern Orthodoxy. When his envoys returned from Constantinople, they spoke of the majesty of the Hagia Sophia. We did not know whether we were in heaven or on earth. Moved by their testimony and driven by political alliance, Vladimir chose orthodoxy. In 988, he accepted baptism and commanded his people to follow. The Dnieper River once again became a vessel of transformation, as the people of Kiev were baptized en masse in its waters. With this act, Rus was bound spiritually and culturally to Byzantium. Christianity transformed the Rus. Churches rose in Kiev, modeled after Byzantine designs. Literacy spread with the Cyrillic script, developed by Byzantine missionaries. Icons, liturgy, and law, all steeped in Byzantine tradition, took root in Slavic soil. The fusion of Norse vigor, Slavic resilience, and Byzantine faith created a civilization unlike any other. And from this union emerged a force that would become legendary, the Varangian Guard. From the great baptism of Rus and the political marriage between Vladimir and Byzantium, a new bond of steel and blood was forged. The Rus were no longer only raiders at the gates of Constantinople. They became allies, mercenaries, and the sworn protectors of the Byzantine emperors themselves. Out of this alliance was born a brotherhood that would echo through centuries, the Varangian Guard. To understand the Guard, one must understand Byzantium's need. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome, stood as the richest and most powerful state in Europe and the Mediterranean. Its capital, Constantinople, gleamed with golden domes, marble streets, and markets bursting with silk sashes and silver. Yet its wealth made it vulnerable. Enemies pressed on all sides, Arab caliphates to the east, Bulgars to the north, Normans and Venetians to the west. Within, intrigues and palace coups threatened emperors as much as foreign foes did. The emperors needed warriors who could be trusted not only in battle, but in the palace itself. The native Byzantine soldiers were brave, but they were also deeply enmeshed in politics. Generals often turned against emperors, using their armies to seize the throne. But the Varangians were different. Foreigners with no stake in Byzantine dynasties. They could be trusted to guard the emperor's life without plotting to take his throne. Their loyalty was to their oath, their pay, and the bond of comradeship. The Varangian Guard first appeared formally in the reign of Emperor Basil II in the late 10th century. Basil, known to history as the Bulgar Slayer, faced enemies within and without. To secure his rule, he turned to the Rus. Prince Vladimir of Kiev sent a force of 6,000 warriors to serve Basil. These Norse Slavic warriors became the nucleus of the Guard, an elite corps unlike any other. Their weapon defined them, the great two-handed battle axe. Towering men from the north wielded axes as tall as a man, blades heavy enough to split helmets and shields in a single stroke. In close combat, they formed a wall of steel, hacking down foes with relentless fury. Byzantine chroniclers described them with awe and terror, giants with golden hair and fierce eyes, cutting through armies like scythes through wheat. But their role was not only on the battlefield. The Varangian Guard were bodyguards of the emperor himself. They stood watch in the palace, their axes glinting in the candlelight of marble halls. They were the last line of defense against conspirators and assassins. They were also the first to strike when the emperor commanded vengeance. To defy the emperor was to face the Varangians, and few survived such defiance. Their loyalty became legendary. Emperors trusted them not only with their lives, but with their secrets. During coronations, the Varangians flanked the throne. During rebellions, they crushed usurpers. When emperors died, it was the Guard who carried their bodies to rest. They were not Byzantines, but they became the living embodiment of imperial power. Basil II tested them in fire. His long wars against the Bulgarians demanded unbreakable troops, and the Varangians delivered. At the Battle of Kievan in 1014, Basil encircled and annihilated the Bulgarian army. Chroniclers record that 14,000 captives were blinded. With only 1 in 100 left one eye to lead the rest home. In this ruthless victory, the Varangians played a decisive role, smashing enemy formations and ensuring Basil's triumph. From that day, Basil was forever remembered as the Bulgar slayer, and the Varangians as his steel hammer. But they were not just soldiers, they were symbols. To the Byzantine people, the sight of tall, golden-haired warriors in foreign dress, bearing massive axes, was both exotic and reassuring. These men had come from the edge of the known world to serve their emperor. Their presence proclaimed the empire's wealth and reach. Over time, the Guard grew more diverse. While Scandinavians remained its backbone, the ties of history added new blood. After the Norman conquest of England in 1066, thousands of Anglo-Saxon warriors, dispossessed of land and home, fled across Europe. Many made their way to Constantinople, where they joined the Guard. For the English exiles, Byzantium offered wealth, purpose, and revenge against the Normans who had conquered their homeland. By the late 11th century, Anglo-Saxons made up a significant part of the Varangian Guard, fighting side by side with their Norse brothers. These Anglo-Saxon Varangians brought with them a fierce loyalty and a hatred of Normans that suited Byzantine politics well. To Byzantium, it mattered little where the warriors came from, so long as they were loyal. To the Varangians, the Guard was more than employment. It was a brotherhood, a chance to regain honor, and a gateway to immense wealth. Many returned home after years of service, carrying treasure and stories of the Queen of Cities. Others remained, buried in foreign soil, their axes rusting under Byzantine skies. Life in the Guard was both privilege and peril. They were richly rewarded, paid in gold, and allowed to plunder after victories. Their barracks in Constantinople placed them near the heart of power. Yet they were always far from home, strangers in a foreign land. Their loyalty was absolute, but it came at the cost of exile. In battle, they became the emperor's shock troops. When rebellions threatened, the Varangians charged first. When enemies breached Byzantine lines, it was the Varangians who counterattacked with axes flashing. Chroniclers described them as unstoppable, their blades cleaving through mail and bone alike. Their discipline and ferocity earned them renown across the empire's enemies. To face the Varangian Guard was to face death. Yet the Guard was more than soldiers. They were guardians of ceremony. At imperial coronations, their chants echoed through Hagia Sophia. At funerals, they bore the bier of emperors. Their very presence became intertwined with the majesty of Byzantium. For centuries, they served as the living symbol of loyalty, steel, and northern might. But the Varangian story cannot be told only in Byzantium. Back in the Rus lands, Norse influence continued to shape the growing state. Kiev flourished as a center of trade, its markets filled with goods from east and west. Churches rose, their domes glinting with gold. Princes ruled with both sword and scripture, balancing Norse traditions with Byzantine faith. The fusion of cultures created something unique. The Norse language faded into Slavic speech, but Norse names endured: Igor, Olga, Oleg, Rurik. The old pagan gods gave way to Christian saints, but the warrior spirit remained. The Rus became a bridge between Scandinavia, Byzantium, and the steppe, a civilization born of rivers and axes, faith and fire. As the 11th and 12th centuries unfolded, the Viking Age waned. In Scandinavia itself, centralized kingdoms arose. Christianity became dominant. The old raiding life gave way to politics, dynasties, and crusades. In the Rus lands, Norse blood blended into the Slavic population. By the time of Yaroslav the Wise, the Rus princes were no longer outsiders, they were native rulers, their Norse origins fading into legend. Still, the memory of the Varangians endured. The Guard continued to serve Byzantium for centuries, their ranks evolving, but their legend unbroken. They fought in the Crusades, clashing with Normans, Saracens, and even Latins. They stood in the palace during the empire's greatest triumphs and darkest hours. When Constantinople finally fell to the Fourth Crusade in 1204, some chroniclers claim the Varangians fought to the last, their axes swinging until the streets ran red. Their legacy was more than battles. In Constantinople, runic graffiti carved by Varangians has been discovered in Hagia Sophia itself. Inscriptions left by bodyguards or proud warriors, their names scratched into marble as if to say, "We were here." Across Scandinavia, runestones record men who traveled east to serve the emperors, boasting of wealth and honor gained in foreign lands. In England, tales persisted of exiles who found new life in the Guard. The Vikings in the east did not vanish. They transformed. They became princes, traders, mercenaries, and guardians. They helped forge the Kievan Rus, shaped the Byzantine Empire, and left behind legends that endured long after the longships rotted and the axes dulled. The Varangian Guard, born in the fire of Basil II's wars and bound by oath to the Byzantine emperors, soon became more than mercenaries. They became the most famous foreign corps in the medieval world, their reputation spreading across Europe and beyond. For centuries, men from Scandinavia, Rus, and later England would abandon their homes and sail south, drawn by the promise of gold, glory, and eternal renown in the service of the Emperor of Constantinople. By the 11th century, the Guard was fully established as the Emperor's elite bodyguard and shock force. They were stationed within the very walls of Constantinople, near the heart of the great palace. Their barracks echoed with northern songs, their feasting tables laden with the rewards of service, their axes always close at hand. The Byzantines both feared and admired them. To the citizens of the Queen of Cities, they were exotic giants, their strange languages filling the air, their foreign customs making them stand out in a cosmopolitan capital. Yet in times of crisis, the people took comfort in their presence. For as long as the Varangians guarded the throne, no assassin's blade could reach the emperor. The Guard's role in Byzantine politics was critical. Civil wars were frequent, with generals and nobles scheming to seize the throne. When coups erupted, the Varangians often decided the outcome. Their loyalty was not to factions, but to the sitting emperor. In palace revolts, they burst into the throne room with axes raised, cutting down traitors and scattering conspirators. Their reputation for violence within the palace was as fearsome as their reputation on the battlefield. To betray the emperor was to face the unyielding wrath of the Varangians. In the field, they served as the emperor's sledgehammer. At the Battle of Beroia in 1122, for example, the Varangians faced the fierce nomadic Pechenegs. These mounted warriors of the steppe were fast and deadly, surrounding their enemies with arrows and cavalry charges. Yet when the Varangians entered the fray, their heavy axes shattered the Pecheneg lines. The chroniclers tell of the Pecheneg camp collapsing under Varangian assault, their warriors falling in droves. The victory was so complete that the Pechenegs ceased to exist as an independent power. Such was the power of the Guard when unleashed. But their service was not limited to the Balkans. The Varangians marched wherever the empire demanded. Against Arab raiders in the east, against Norman adventurers in Italy, against rebellious governors in Anatolia, they were always at the emperor's side. Their axes became symbols of imperial justice, their foreignness a reminder of the empire's vast reach. It was during the 11th century that the Anglo-Saxon influx transformed the Guard. After the Norman conquest of England in 1066, thousands of warriors found themselves dispossessed. Their lands seized, their families broken, their culture suppressed. These men sought refuge. Some went to Scandinavia, others to Ireland, but many sailed for Byzantium. There, in the service of the emperor, they found a new home. The Byzantines welcomed them eagerly. The Anglo-Saxons were seasoned fighters, disciplined and loyal, with a burning hatred of the Normans who had taken their land. In Constantinople, they were called England Barangui, the English Varangians. Together with their Scandinavian brothers, they formed a diverse brotherhood, united not by nation, but by exile and oath. For these men, the Guard was more than employment. It was a chance to regain honor. They carved their names into Byzantine stone, fought in campaigns across the empire, and amassed fortunes in gold and silver. Some returned home after years of service, bringing wealth and exotic tales. Others remained forever in the Queen of Cities, their bones buried beneath foreign skies. The Guard's life in Constantinople was a mixture of splendor and severity. They were well paid, their loyalty rewarded with gold coins, land, and privileges. After great victories, they were granted the right of the chest, the tradition of looting the emperor's treasury at the death of their master. This strange custom, tolerated by Byzantine rulers, became both feared and accepted, a reminder of the Guard's unique status. At the same time, their discipline was harsh. They lived apart from the populace, foreigners in a city of intrigue. They were sworn to absolute loyalty, their lives pledged to the throne. The Varangians also became part of Byzantine ceremonial life. They marched in imperial processions, their axes gleaming in the sun. At coronations, their presence symbolized strength and protection. At funerals, they bore the emperor's bier, their voices chanting in strange northern tongues. In the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, their names and runes have been found carved into marble columns, proof of their presence and their pride. But as the Guard thrived in Byzantium, the lands of the Rus were changing. The Kievan Rus, founded by Rurik and expanded by Oleg, Igor, and Vladimir, reached its golden age under Yaroslav the Wise. Kiev became a jewel of the north, its churches rivaling those of Constantinople, its princes intermarrying with European royalty. The Norse influence, once dominant, blended seamlessly into Slavic culture. By Yaroslav's time, the rulers of Rus were no longer outsiders. They were part of a new identity, neither fully Norse nor fully Slavic, but something unique. Yet prosperity brought fragility. The unity of the Rus was delicate, dependent on strong rulers. After Yaroslav's death, succession disputes fractured the realm. Kiev's power waned as rival cities like Novgorod and Vladimir rose. The once united Rus became a patchwork of competing principalities, vulnerable to steppe invasions and political intrigue. As the Rus weakened, Byzantium too faced decline. The 11th and 12th centuries were centuries of crisis. The Normans carved away Byzantine holdings in Italy. The Seljuk Turks crushed Byzantine armies in Anatolia, most famously at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, where the empire's power was shattered. Though the Varangian Guard fought bravely, they could not prevent disaster. The defeat opened Anatolia to Turkish conquest and marked the beginning of Byzantine decline. The Guard remained loyal, but loyalty could not save a crumbling empire. They fought in the Crusades, sometimes as allies, sometimes as reluctant hosts. They clashed with Normans in southern Italy, with Venetians on the sea, with Turks in the east. But the empire they served was no longer the titan it had been under Basil II. Intrigue, corruption, and foreign enemies weakened Byzantium from within and without. By the 13th century, the Varangian Guard was a shadow of its former self. Still respected, still loyal, but no longer decisive. The empire's enemies grew stronger, its resources thinner. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade turned its fury on Constantinople itself. Latin crusaders stormed the walls, driven not by faith, but by greed. The Queen of Cities, which had withstood sieges for centuries, fell not to Muslims, but to fellow Christians. Chroniclers described the chaos as the Crusaders looted the greatest city in Christendom. Amid the slaughter, the Varangian Guard is said to have fought valiantly, their axes cutting through Crusader ranks. But they were too few. The empire they had sworn to defend collapsed in fire and blood. Constantinople was sacked, its treasures carried west, its churches desecrated. The Varangian Guard, once the steel wall of the emperor, could not halt the tide. Though the Guard survived in diminished form in the centuries that followed, its glory days were gone. The Viking Age itself had ended. Scandinavia had become kingdoms, the Rus had become Slavic states, and Byzantium was a fragment of its former self. Yet the legend of the Varangians endured. The fall of Constantinople to the Crusaders in 1204 shattered the world the Varangians had known. The Guard still existed, still served, but its power was broken. In the new, Latin-dominated empire, the role of the foreign bodyguards dwindled. They remained a relic of an earlier age, remembered with awe but no longer decisive. By the 14th century, references to the Varangian Guard grow scarce. Their final chapters fade into obscurity, leaving only echoes in stone and memory. Yet the legacy of the Varangians and the Vikings in the East cannot be measured merely in battles or empires. Their influence reshaped cultures, forged identities, and left an imprint across centuries. In the lands of the Rus, the Norse presence fused with Slavic traditions to create something new. The first princes of Kiev bore Norse names Rurik, Oleg, Igor, but within a few generations, their descendants carried Slavic ones, Sviatoslav, Vladimir, Yaroslav. The language of the court shifted. The sagas gave way to chronicles written in Slavic script, and the gods of Asgard were replaced by the Christian god of Kiev. But beneath this transformation lay the foundation the Varangians had built. The river trade routes remained lifelines. Even after the Viking Age ended, merchants continued to ply the Dnieper and Volga, linking the forests of the north with the markets of Byzantium and the steppes of Asia. The idea of a Rus people, first organized by Norse adventurers, grew into an enduring identity. Over time, this identity would evolve into the nations we know today: Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Each traces part of its origin story back to the days when the Varangians came rowing out of the mist, their longships gliding across the rivers of the East. In Scandinavia, memories of Eastern exploits lingered in sagas and carvings. Runestones in Sweden bear inscriptions to men who died in Greece, the Norse term for Byzantium. Families honored their kin who had sailed to Constantinople, fought for emperors, and returned with wealth and stories. Some stones commemorate warriors who never returned, fallen in distant wars, their fate sealed in the shadow of Hagia Sophia. These monuments stand today as silent witnesses to the deep connection between Scandinavia and Byzantium. The sagas also preserve traces of the Varangian legend. In the saga of Harald Hardrada, the future king of Norway spends years in the service of the Byzantine emperor, leading the Guard in campaigns from Sicily to Jerusalem. Though the sagas embellish, their core reflects truth, that Norse warriors sought fortune in the south, and that their service in Byzantium shaped their lives and their legends. Harald himself returned to Norway rich and hardened, claiming the throne and earning the title, the last great Viking. In Byzantium, too, their memory endured. Chronicles spoke of the axe-bearing giants from the north, loyal to the throne, terrifying in battle. Even centuries later, the image of the Varangian Guard lingered in Greek tradition as symbols of fierce loyalty and martial strength. The carvings they left in Hagia Sophia, runes etched by bored guardsmen into marble walls, still whisper of their presence. Ordinary men, far from home, marking their existence in a city of emperors. But beyond legend and memory, the Vikings in the East left legacies that shaped entire civilizations. The Christianization of Rus under Vladimir linked the Slavic world to Byzantine faith and culture. The architecture of Kiev's churches, the art of its mosaics, the rhythm of its liturgy, all bore the imprint of Constantinople. The adoption of Orthodox Christianity would define Russian and Ukrainian identity for centuries, setting them apart from the Catholic West. This decision, born of diplomacy and marriage, was rooted in the encounters first made by the Varangians who sailed down the Dnieper. The Byzantine connection also introduced systems of law, governance, and trade that anchored the Rus in the wider medieval world. Where once only river raiders had prowled, now cities thrived, literacy spread, and chronicles recorded history. The blending of Norse warrior tradition with Byzantine sophistication created a hybrid culture unlike any other. And yet, even as the Varangian age passed, its spirit lingered. The image of the wandering warrior, leaving his homeland to seek service in distant lands, became a recurring theme in northern imagination. The sagas idealized it, the runestones recorded it, and the chronicles marveled at it. The story of the Varangians became part of the greater Viking saga, proof that the Northmen were not only raiders and conquerors of the West, but also explorers, founders, and protectors in the East. The decline of the Viking Age did not erase their memory. When Scandinavia became Christian kingdoms, when the Rus became Slavic states, when Byzantium shrank under Turkish pressure, the tales of Varangians endured around the hearth. Generations later, chroniclers still spoke of them as symbols of loyalty, courage, and wanderlust. Today, historians trace the connections across continents. They see in the Norse voyages to Kiev and Constantinople the beginnings of Eurasian exchange, where fur and wax, silver and silk, ideas and faith crossed borders. They see in the rise of Rus the birth of nations, and in the Varangian Guard the embodiment of cultural fusion. The Vikings in the East were more than a chapter in history. They were a bridge between worlds. As our journey through their story comes to an end, we return to the rivers where it began. Picture once more the longships pushing through the fog, their dragon prows cutting the water, their oars flashing in rhythm. Within them, warriors dream not of raiding monasteries in the West, but of riches in Constantinople, of service to emperors, of kingdoms waiting to be forged. Their path was eastward, and their legacy is written in stone, in saga, and in the very identities of nations that endure to this day. The Vikings in the East remind us that history is not bound by borders, that cultures meet and merge, and that the deeds of wandering warriors can shape empires. Their story is one of ambition, adventure, and transformation, a story worthy of the Viking Age. And so, the saga of the Varangians, the Rus, and the Byzantine connection draws to a close. From the misty rivers of the north to the golden domes of Constantinople, the Vikings carved their mark upon history in ways both seen and unseen. If you've enjoyed this voyage into the past, stand with us as the Varangians once stood with their emperor. Like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join our shield wall as we continue the epic journey through Viking history. Until next time, may your sails be full and your axes sharp.